Okay. And we're live.
Hey, this is Damon with the Maryland Youth Leadership Forum, and we have Ann Tulkin today. She is the director of Accessible College. Hey, could you take the floor, Ann?
Got it. I am here and ready to go. I'm actually going to share my screen with you guys. Let me see if I can figure that out. Shannon, can you make me a co-host?
So at the bottom, just hit share screen. You can
Okay.
do it.
All right. Let's see if that works.
You see where it says share screen at the bottom?
Yeah, it's just not letting me do it, but let me see. While that's going on, while I'm kind of navigating this whole, okay.
It doesn't show how I can make you a co-host.
Oh wait, I think it's working now.
There you go.
Boom. See, the magic of technology. Together, we could do it, guys. Okay, so let me do that. All right, so I made a PowerPoint so you didn't have to just look at my face the whole time, but now you get to look at my face on the PowerPoint. So yay, there it is. So I'm Annie Tulkin, as Damon said. I am the founder and director of Accessible College. And just like a little bit of background about me, so that'll kind of contextualize what we're talking about today. I've worked for over 10 years in the disability field in nonprofits and in university settings. So for about 5.5 years, I was the associate director at the Disability Support Office at Georgetown University, right here in Washington, D.C., right nearby. I was also a Peace Corps volunteer and a Fulbright Fellow, and my background is in special education. So that's just kind of good context for people to know. Related really to what we're going to chat about today. So I mentioned that I was at Georgetown, and when I was there, I worked with undergraduate students, grad students, and medical students with physical disabilities and health conditions, focused on figuring out what accommodations were going to work for them in the college setting. So working on like the academic stuff, so any accommodations they needed in the academic setting, but also in the residential setting, so in the dormitory, and in programmatic settings and things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about that today, because I think some of those other pieces are some parts that students sometimes don't really think about before going into college. And so I wanted to make sure to mention that. So I oversaw the housing process there at Georgetown, which gave me a lot of insight into some of the other needs that students have. And then I also did academic support there too. So I worked with the student body on time management, organization, and I worked across the university with other departments to make sure that students had what they needed to be successful. And in my job now with Accessible College, I work one-on-one with students and families to figure out what kind of transition supports a student needs when they're looking at colleges or when they're transitioning to college, and also helping students kind of figure out what executive function skills or things that they need to have in place before they go. So things like managing your own medication, knowing who your doctors are, getting everything squared away. So that's what I do with students now. And that's kind of what I wanted to share with you guys. But I also just wanted to say, if people have questions as we're going along, you can jump in and ask questions, because that'll be much more interesting and engaging than just me talking at you. So I wanted to give you some information first. And this information comes from the National Center for College Students with Disabilities. And if you want, Shannon, I can send you some of these links so you can share them with the students, because there's really great information out there. The National Center for College Students with Disabilities also has a program attached to it called DREAM, which is Disability Rights, Education, and Mentoring. And so that's groups of students, current college students, who work together on disability related issues on their campuses across the country. So some of you guys might be kind of interested in just like seeing what's out there. The National Center for College Students with Disabilities is a great place to kind of get some of this information. But I wanted you all to know that Right now, we know that 19%, approximately 19% of undergraduate college students report having a disability. So these are the students who have gone to the Disability Support Office and have requested accommodations. And that includes things like learning disabilities, ADD, mobility impairments, mental health issues, other health conditions. Um, so I mentioned that I work with students with health conditions, and health conditions could be anything from like diabetes to epilepsy to lupus to Crohn's disease or gastrointestinal issues. So there's a lot of things that might impact you when you're in a school setting, a lot of different health conditions that are out there. So one thing that I always love to point out here is we know approximately 19%, these are the students that we know about because they've gone and they've actually requested the accommodations. So we can imagine that it's probably more like 40 or 50% of students who are undergraduates who could actually get accommodations because they likely have conditions that would qualify them for accommodations. So that's just something to think about. And I often talk to students about this because a lot of students feel like maybe they're the only ones who are getting accommodations or they're feeling like alone about it. But when you look at these numbers, you know that like for most college campuses, that's somewhere between 11 and 25% of the students who are getting accommodations. So that's a good portion of the students who are there. We also know that some studies suggest that it takes students with disabilities longer than 4 years to complete college. And we know that students with disabilities drop out at a much higher rate than their non-disabled peers. And so one of the things that I wanted to connect with you all about was figuring out how we can be better about this transition process so that you all have the best tools when you're going into college so that you don't fall into one of these statistics, right? And so we know that if we have better preparation, we can actually be better students and be more effective and be more successful. So, and this is just like a quick kind of overview aside. These are the different laws. I know you guys have been diving into this a little bit as you've been moving along through your conversations, but we have like IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's for high school, K through 12 schools, high school and grade school, and Section 504. But in college, the laws change. So it's just the Americans with Disabilities Act. So the accommodations that, and Section 504, but the accommodations that you might have in a high school setting could be different from what you get in a college setting. And I think that catches a lot of students off guard. A lot of students don't know that. And so I wanted to show you just kind of like how that is different, what that looks like in terms of real life, right? So in high school, it's usually like your school or your teachers or your parents who are identifying the needs and the concern, and they're speaking up for you. But in college, you have to go to the Disability Support Office and self-identify. So you have to bring in documentation. You have to go through the process, which we'll talk about and have a conversation with those people. If you get accommodations in your high school, so let's say you get extra time or you get notes for your classes or things like that, usually the school does that. They arrange it for you. You show up, to take your test, and they have the extra time is already worked out. But in college, you actually have to be proactive and organized and talk to the Disability Support Office. It's usually like anywhere from a week in advance to 48 hours in advance where you'd have to complete a form to take a test in a testing center, which is different than in high school. So the system changes a little bit. And in high school, the teachers typically come to you if they think like, oh, this student needs more help in math, maybe they could use a tutor. But in college, the professors expect you to come to them. So you have to go to the office hours. You have to initiate the contact if you need help. Nobody's going to be coming to you to say, how is this working for you? It's contingent on you, the student, saying, this isn't working for me, or I need help or assistance. And so that's where it becomes a little bit tricky for students who haven't really developed those skills to be able to speak up and say those things. Before I go any further, are there any questions so far? I just want to make sure that like people are still with me.
Yes, I had
Yeah.
a question. How long
Okay.
have you been doing your accessible college?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I started the business in 2014, but I've been doing it full time now for about a year and a half. So And at the end of this, I'll put up my information, because I do a lot of blogs and stuff that you guys might be interested in reading, just about like students with different health conditions and transitioning to college and things that you might want to consider. So so I'll make sure you have that information.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Yeah. Are there other things that folks are thinking about?
Yes.
Yeah. What's up?
What made you want to do what made you want to do this? How do you like it?
Yes. So the thing that made me want to get into this job was when I worked at Georgetown, I had so many students who came to me who just really didn't have any idea about what types of accommodations they could request. They didn't know how to talk about what they needed. They didn't know how to discuss their disability. They hadn't had to do it before. And so I thought, wow, I'm getting all of this content information. I could be really helpful to students before they find themselves in a crisis situation in college where they're like freaking out and having to come to me mid-semester. So that's why I started Accessible College, so that I could help people before they transition to college, so that they were better prepared and could be more successful. So that's what made me want to do it. And I love working with students. You guys are all so fun and engaging, and the challenges that you face are so always so interesting. It's never dull for when you work with young folks. So that's what I love to do. That's my passion. Let's talk a little bit about documentation. I don't know if anybody's kind of talked to you all about this or what this looks like, but when you go to request accommodations in college, you actually have to bring in documentation of a disability. And that can look a little bit different depending on what types of disabilities you may have. So it could be like a neuropsychological evaluation. If you have a learning disability, that's typically what you're bringing in. And sometimes if you go to a public school, sometimes you get this type of evaluation in school. So your school counselor might have a copy of a neuropsych evaluation, or it could be like a psychological evaluation if you have a mental health condition.
So I report would count.
What's that?
I report would count. Like I report from your doctor.
Yeah. So that, and then like, and the other piece of that too is like letters from a healthcare provider, right? So there's kind of, those are like the three types of documentation. And usually those letters from your healthcare provider would have like your diagnosis, the outline of functional limitations. And what that means is looking at where you maybe have some difficulty doing some of these things that you might need to do in school. So for example, if you have a mobility impairment and you can't use your arms to write, but you need to use a computer, the functional limitation would be that, the student can't use their arm, so they'll need to use like speech to text software, and that would be the recommendation of accommodation. Or if a student has a slow processing speed because they have a learning disability, that would be in the evaluation, and then the recommendation would be extra time for tests or extra time for the student to complete work. So those are just some examples. But really the most important thing is once you figure out either what college you're going to, and I know a couple of you are starting at Montgomery College in the fall, you can look at their website, at the Disability Support Office website, and find out how to submit documentation and what types of documentation they're looking for. And if some of you are like doing college search things, you can
Where did you say I go for Montgomery College?
Yeah, what did you say? Go ahead.
So for documentation for Montgomery College, where did you say we go to?
Yeah, so you can, if you Google Disability Support Office Montgomery College, you'll bring up their website, and they'll have information on the types of documentation that you'll need to submit in order to get accommodations. And because Montgomery College specifically has like a couple different campuses, it'll actually tell you who to contact on each campus to connect and start that process. And now is actually a really good time, the summer before, because as things ramp up for fall, the Disability Support Office starts to get a little bit busier. And so it's good to start just like working on these pieces now. The other thing is like, in case they need more information from you, then you have a little bit of time to get that information.
Annie, I have a question.
Yeah.
How does the IEP translate into college?
Damon, you are like a mind reader, and let me tell you why. Because on this slide, we'll talk about IEPs, right? So the IEP does not directly translate to the college setting. So your IEP has accommodations and it has services. So in high school, you might get tutoring as a part of your IEP. You might get occupational therapy included in your IEP. You might have a one-on-one aid in your IEP. And you might have things like extra time on tests or, notes in advance and all kinds of stuff. In the college setting, because the laws changed to ADA, the ADA you only have to provide, the university, the college only has to provide reasonable accommodations as defined in the ADA. So services are no longer a piece of that. So if you had a one-on-one aide in high school that's helping you, let's say you use a wheelchair, mobility impairment, and you have a person who helps you get from class to class and take out things out of your bag and make sure you have everything you need. In college, that's not something that the college is going to provide. If you wanted to have a personal care attendant or an attendant come with you to college, you'd have to do that by yourself and provide that by yourself. But the IEP can inform the types of accommodations that you might receive in the college setting. So the easy kind of like one-to-one things. If you got extra time in high school for tests and you have documentation to support that, then you'll probably get that in college. If you had notes from your teacher in high school, let's say your teacher was giving you PowerPoints in advance, you might get something like a note taker in the college setting because it's a little bit different. If you had something like extra time for assignments, you'd probably get extensions for assignments in college setting too if you had a need for that. But the one that's sometimes tricky, modified assignments. So a lot of times in high school, they might give students a modified assignment, right? So you might have to do less of an assignment than other students. Mm-hmm. In college, they don't do that. So it's you'd have to complete the same assignment that everybody else in the coursework has to complete. So that's one that's sometimes on an IEP that just doesn't translate to the college setting.
Okay, I got a question for the delegates. Is there anybody who doesn't know what an IEP is?
Oh yeah.
Is there anybody who does not know what an IEP is?
It's okay if you don't. We'll tell you.
Can you remind me what
I know what
it
an
stands for?
IEP is.
I know what it is.
Too,
It's
actually.
an IEP.
All right.
Isn't it international plan, something like that?
Well, we've got you. You've got the word plan, so that's part of it. That's part of it. It's an individual education program is what it is technically. Sometimes people say plan, but it's technically program. We don't have to get hung up on that, but it's an individual education plan. Typically, if you have a disability and you're going to a public school, you have an IEP. You might have some students might have a 504 plan, and that's usually students who have like a health condition. So if you had like if you just had like a migraine disorder or epilepsy or something like that, you might have a 504 plan, and that would have accommodations in it too. But here's the thing that I really want to make sure that you know too. As a part of this documentation stuff, these are all really good documents. So that IEP, if you have an IEP and you haven't read it, number one, please just sit down and read your IEP. I know it sounds like horrible, boring reading, but it's all about you. And it kind of evaluates where you've been going in that high school journey. So it's good. It's really important information for you to know going into college. So if you have that IEP, or if you don't have it, ask your school guidance counselor for it so that you can have a copy of it and you can read it yourself. That's really important. Yeah.
Is there any way I can access my IEP online?
That's a great question. So it probably depends on your school district, but the best way to do that would probably be to contact your school counselor and just ask for a copy. Usually they email or mail you a copy each year. So you might want to just check with your parents, but you can always ask for it. It's yours. It's your information, so you can ask for it.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
Please hold on to your last IEP too.
That's a
Yeah.
good question.
Yeah, please hold on to it from experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, because the other thing that
The
the
school only
unspoken
holds it for 5 years, I think.
Hold
Yeah.
on to it forever.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
well, yeah.
forever.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
the
Put it in your
unspoken
freezer.
the unspoken thing, that's funny. The unspoken thing, my grandma used to hide money in her freezers.
The freezer. It won't
So
burn.
the unspoken thing that Kelvin isn't saying is that if you lose these documents, it can be really hard to get them from your school after the fact. And they only keep them for a certain number of years. I think somebody said 5 years. So if you have a copy of it, if you have a hard copy, try and get it scanned or take pictures of it with your phone and email it to yourself or whatever you need to do to make sure that you have that copy. That's
And
really
also,
important.
can I add something?
Go. Yeah.
You have to understand that if when you get your IEP and you read it and you don't agree with it, or it's something you want to change, that's your right. You should be part of your IEP. You should be in that meeting. Anything about you, you should be there. So if it's something that you want to change or something you need someone to explain, you have a right to be a part of that meeting.
100%. And sometimes students feel like it's a little weird or uncomfortable for them, but it's great training for what's going to happen when you go to college. Because essentially what happens when you go to college is you bring in this documentation to the disability support office, and then you're going to be expected to have a conversation with someone about what you need, right? So they're going to ask you, what types of accommodations do you need? And you need to be able to say, well, I have, this condition, so I'm going to need extra time. I'm going to need these types of accommodations. And I think that's it's a good segue to this one, which was just talking about self-advocacy, right? So talking about your disability, you need to be able to do that. You need to be comfortable doing that. So the more opportunities that you can engage and do that, the IEP meetings with your school, with your teachers, talking to your doctor, whatever those things are, finding those things where you can start doing a little bit more for yourself, knowing what you need. So looking at your whole life, right? All the things, eating, sleeping, school, social activities, and just sitting down and making a list. What are the accommodations that I need? What are the supports that I need in order to be able to engage? And then knowing that it's not always going to be perfect, right? And knowing who you can go to for support. So if it's the folks at Independence Now, going back and asking Shannon, asking Kelvin questions, how do I do this? What do I need to do? Maybe it's your school counselor, maybe it's a friend, but knowing your tools and your resources so that you can actually ask and engage and work with people and figure out what do I need to be doing? How do I do this? Because sometimes that's the hardest thing to say, I don't know. But it's a great skill to have too, because then you can actually learn and get better and do it better the next time, right? So this is kind of what I wanted to.
Can you go back for a quick minute?
Yeah.
So
And I'll send you guys these slides too if you want. Yeah, go ahead. What was your question?
the question was knowing other people's needs. What is that supposed to exactly mean?
So like knowing your needs. So knowing what types of accommodations you're going to need, knowing the areas of your life where you might need support. So for example, going back to like a student who has a physical disability, like if you need support getting dressed in the morning with daily living activities or with eating, or someone who has a learning disability, like if you're going to need tutoring, if you're going to need more help or extra time, it's good to just kind of start to think about different areas of your life where you may need some supports, so that when you go and have these conversations in the college setting with the disability support office, you're ready. You've got it all charted out. All right. And then I just wanted to talk about like the typical kind of academic accommodations. And I know Josh Basile talked about a little bit about this with you guys yesterday about the types of accommodations that he got in college. So some of those things are like extra time for tests, maybe a note taker, and that could be a student if you have a mobility impairment, if you can't if you're not able to use your hands, you might need a note taker, or you might need to use your laptop in class. Or if you have a learning disability too, a note taker can be really helpful as well because they might be able to catch some of the things that you're not catching because you're focusing on what the professor is saying. So there might be some other people that need note takers. And then other types of accommodations. So like extensions for your assignments, flexibility in attendance. If you have, let's say your care attendant didn't show up to help you, so you couldn't get to class, you might need an accommodation for flexibility in attendance. Or if you have a condition that has a flare up, if you have a health condition and you're not feeling great, you might need that flexibility in attendance. Priority registration is another type of accommodation that sometimes students ask for, specifically students who have physical disabilities, because that allows them to choose like classes that are at a specific time of day to make sure that they're getting into those classes, because you usually have to schedule around a lot of other things. And then assistive technology. So different schools might offer different assistive technology that could be useful to you. So things like, I think Josh mentioned yesterday when he was talking to you guys that he used Kurzweil, which is just an online reading software that reads things to you. But there's a lot of stuff out there now. And I know that some of you too are probably working with vocational rehabilitation, DOORS, in Maryland Department of Rehabilitation Services. And they have a lot of access to some of this assistive technology too, which can carry over with you into college as well. My God, where's the time going?
I had a question
Yeah,
from the
go
side.
ahead.
Can
Yeah.
can you go to the, can one also go to the disabilities office to ask for any of these following things listed?
Yeah. So this is exactly what you would be talking about with the Disability Support Office. So they're the people who approve those accommodations. So if you need extra time for tests, if you need a note taker, those are the people who are going to be helping you get those accommodations and coordinate those accommodations when you're on campus. So it's kind of like those are the people who are like your school guidance counselor or whoever does this stuff now. So you want to make sure that you're comfortable with those people in the disability support office too. And I know, if some of you are looking at different four-year schools or universities or even tech or trade schools moving forward, when you're looking at schools, go and visit the disability support office or set up a time to have a conversation with those people, because you want to get a good feeling from those people too, to know that they're actually going to be supportive of you when you're on campus. And I know oh my gosh, we are going through this stuff. I'm going to go quickly through a couple more things just because I wanted to make sure that everybody was thinking about accommodations, not just in the classroom, but also across campus. So some of you might be thinking about living on campus at some point, going to a university, living in a dorm, living that dorm life. If that's you, you might need some accommodations for your housing too. So and I'll share these slides with you guys so that you can have them in case we don't get through them all. But there's a process for requesting housing accommodations too. It's usually through the Disability Support Office, and you have to provide documentation for what you need. And this picture that's over here, it's a picture of a dorm room at the University of Central Florida, I think, that actually has kind of a lift above the bed so that a student with a physical disability can use that to get themselves out of the bed. Different schools have different features like that. Some schools don't have things like that. But if that's something that you might need, then you'd want to like seek out a school that has that stuff. Other types of accommodations that people need in the residence hall are like an ADA accessible room. Some students have emotional support animals, which are different from service animals. Service animals are just dogs or miniature ponies. Emotional support animal can be any animal, but you have to go through the university's process to request that. Some students might need a single room. So if you have a migraine disorder or a mental health condition or other needs that might require you to need a single room, that's another thing that you could ask for. But really, the other things to think about too are like, is this space going to work for me, right? Like, do I have the things that I need in order to be functional here on this campus? So if you're thinking more broadly about going away to school and living away at school, the residential accommodations might be something that you want to think about in the future. This one applies to a lot of you as well. Recreation. This is another area on a college campus where you can ask for accommodations. So the ADA and Section 504 both have provisions for what's known as auxiliary aids. And those auxiliary aids are things like CART for people who are deaf so that they can have live captioning or sign language interpreters, but also things like adaptive or specialized gym equipment. So if you want to be able to use the campus gym, you should be able to. And so you can make those requests for accommodations for things like a chairlift for the pool, accessible changing facilities, adaptive equipment in the gym, simply moving things in the gym so that if you use a chair, you can get around the gym, that kind of stuff. Or if you need something, if you have a visual impairment and you need something tactile, you just have to communicate those things to the school and make that request through the disability support office is usually the place to start. Dining hall. A lot of you will be going, maybe eating in a cafeteria. There's usually a process for requesting dining accommodations. Most people request them because of food allergies or gluten intolerance. Sometimes students who have eating disorders also request accommodations, or a mobility impairment if you need navigational help, kind of getting the food and things to your tray. So that's another thing where the disability support office could really be helpful and assistive in making sure that you have what you need in that area. And then programmatic, this is everybody's favorite one. So like if there's a sporting event or a concert or a speaker that you want to go and see, you might want to check out and see what the process is for requesting accessible seating or for requesting transportation to that event. If everybody else is able to jump in a van and you're not able to do that, you want to make sure that there's a process for requesting those types of things so that you can be a part of that campus life. So some of those things include, seating, transportation, sign language interpreters. Those are all examples of just different types of requests that people sometimes need to be able to do these programmatic things. And I want to make sure we have at least a couple minutes. Yay, we do. At least a couple minutes for other questions, but I put up my contact info on my website. I'm on Twitter and Facebook. So it's Accessible College for Facebook. And it's, if you're on Twitter, which you should be, because you're all going to be activists soon. So you need to be on Twitter. Because that's where
I'm not on Twitter.
That's where all the activists are at. At Accessible College is my Facebook, and then at ACCSS College for Twitter. You can find me on my website too, accessiblecollege.com. But do you guys have any? I just dropped a ton of information on you, but do you have any questions or things that like that has brought up for you as we're going along? So I did a really thorough job, and now it's perfect. And
could you put your slide back up for a quick minute?
Yeah, sorry, I'll put that end screen back up.
Over your years doing this, or over the time you've done this, what is probably the most prevalent accommodation that most students ask for that you know of?
I think, it really depends on the student's needs, right? And I think a lot of times, like for most disability support offices, most of the students who are going there for accommodations have learning disabilities or ADD. Those are the big things, right? So, and the usual accommodations that accompany those types of disabilities are like extra time for tests, maybe notes, maybe a laptop in the classroom.
Are there any situations where the college may not appease the requests? And is there any actions that need to be taken?
Yeah, so there might be. So if you don't have documentation to support your request, the college might say, you need to go back and get either updated documentation. So if you have a neuropsych evaluation that's older than 3 years old, or that doesn't use adult scales, and in the neuropsych evaluation, they if you had one done in grade school, you usually need to have an updated one done in high school. So the college or the university might say you need to go have more testing done, or updated testing done. So that could happen. Or if you have a physical disability and you're saying you need something and it's not clear to them why you might need something, they might say, oh, can you have your doctor write up a letter just outlining what your needs are. What I always recommend to students, and this is like a pro tip here, a free tip for everybody, is to ask for an interim accommodation while you go and get that documentation. So you can say, if they say, we're not comfortable giving this to you without more documentation, you can say, would you be willing to give it to me through the end of the semester while I work on getting the documentation in place? And some schools might say yes. The other thing is, if you feel like you've been discriminated against, every college has a process where you can start a process to say that you feel like you've been discriminated against, and then it'll go through the university or the college's process to figure out if that's the case. Is that helpful? Does that answer your question?
And I'm sorry, could you take the shared screen down now? Because I want to be able to see. There we go. Who's asking the question?
Totally.
Okay. In general, is there a notable difference in the quality of accommodations based on college?
That's such a tricky question. You guys have good questions. So I wouldn't say that there's a big difference in the types of accommodations, but there might be a difference in how the accommodation is administered and your feeling as the student. So like a good example of that is that at some universities, the person in the disability support office will actually sit down and have a conversation with you about your needs and how you want your experience to be. At other places, the person in the disability support office might sit down and not really have that interactive process, that engaging process. They might just look at your documentation and say, we're going to approve you for this, this, and this, and not really take into account, other factors or other needs that you might have, or really have a conversation with you. So I would say that thinking about, if you're starting to look at schools, having those conversations, setting up times to talk with the people in the disability support office to get a vibe of what they're like and how they administer things and how they may or may not be helpful to you, can be really illuminating, can show you like if that's a place where you think that you want to go. I think that, like, for the most part, accommodations are pretty similar, but the way that they're handled is pretty different. And the feeling you get, can be pretty different from college to college too. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
Hey, can I add something to that? I would say also for people who may have some type of physical impairment, you should go visit the college because it may be spread out. It may be kind of terrain, might be kind of tough for you. So, me using a wheelchair, it's good for me to have a place that may be a little more compact and everything's in one place rather than it being spread out and me having a difficult time being able to work the terrain.
110%. So now with COVID-19, like a lot of people can't go on college tours. That's like a thing that's going on right now. I wrote an article recently on physical accessibility and taking virtual college tours, which I'll share with you guys, because a lot of the virtual tours don't really do a great job of showing you the campus from the perspective of somebody who might need a more accessible campus, right? It'll show you like the front of the building, when you and I both know that like the accessible entrance might be around the back by the dumpsters. And you'd want to know that if you were choosing that school, like, does this school feel open and welcoming to me with my needs, right? And so one of the things that I always say, like for students with physical disabilities, if you can go and visit the campus, absolutely go and visit the campus. If you can't go and visit the campus, you should definitely try and have conversations with the Disability Support Office, either prior to applying or prior to before accepting too. And then see if they can connect you with other people with similar disabilities who are on campus already, because then you can talk to those people and get a sense of like what it's been like for them to be on that campus, and what some of the challenges that they may have had are, and how receptive the Disability Support Office and the university has been to their needs. And that can give you a little bit more information about what that school is actually going to be like for you. So that's a really good point about going and checking out if the physical layout of the campus is maybe going to be an issue for you. Go try and see that campus beforehand, before showing up there on the first day. Are there any other things that you guys are thinking about, or that have any questions that you have?
So for like when it comes to like this year when we're going, so I'm like, so I technically a senior when we're like community college, but anyway, how is it going to be like different when or this difference if it's like, online for accommodation?
Yeah. So the question was, how is it going to be different if it's going to be online? And I think everybody's like wrestling with this right now, right? Because of all the COVID-19 stuff. And also like some of you might choose to be in an online program anyway. But regardless, you still go through the process of requesting accommodations through the Disability Support Office. So that whole process of requesting accommodations is still the same. Where it might be different is, if you're taking a test and it's an online exam, you would still probably have to work through the Disability Support Office if you get extra time. The note-taking stuff would probably still be the same too, so you'd probably still work through the Disability Support Office to do that. If you require other accommodations too, like let's say that you needed captioning, or you needed an interpreter, or you needed accessible formats of some of the materials, that's still through the Disability Support Office. So you would make those requests. Where students, I think, sometimes have a little bit of trouble is if something doesn't work out for you. Like let's say you need something in an accessible format, you need to make sure that if you're not getting something you need, if you don't get your extra time, if you're not getting things in the accessible format, that you're then going back to the Disability Support Office and saying, I didn't get what I needed. I need support with this. So for the online setting, not a lot will really change in terms of the types of accommodations, because you'll still need those accommodations. But I do think that schools, different colleges, are still trying to figure out like what it looks like in the online setting too. So if you're in an online class and you're not getting the things that you need, you just need to be proactive about bringing it up. And I know that gets exhausting for people to have to re-advocate all the time. But unfortunately, it's kind of where things are at in the college setting when it comes to disability support. If you're not getting what you need to be able to speak up about it. Is that helpful?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
I also had another question. So since you said any accommodations, you go to the Disability Support Office, would you just like go look up a college? If say I wanted to go to Montgomery College or University of Maryland, would I look up the University of Maryland Disability Support Office?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, because yes, that's what you would do. So you can jot that down and do that. But the Disability Support Office might have a different name at different colleges. So it could be Disability Support Services. It might be Accessibility Services. It could be the Disability Support Office. It could be the Academic Resource Center or the Academic Support Office. So different colleges have different names, but the best way to find it is to put in the college's name. So whatever, Georgetown and disability, or American University disability. And usually it's the first thing that'll come up in the search. So that's a good way to kind of figure it out. Are there other things that people are thinking about?
I'm almost at that step of talking to a disability service member because, well, I'm going to Prince George's Community College hopefully next fall. So I'm almost at the step of getting my, well, I already have my transcripts in. So I think sooner or later I'm going to be talking to a DSS advisor about accommodations and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And so, like,
because Kelvin knows those folks. Talk to Kelvin.
That's true. That's true.
Tap in with Kelvin. For sure. But and then Kelvin will walk you through that whole process of making sure you have the documentation that you need to have that together, because that's like the key thing. And then making sure that you're ready for that conversation with the people in the office, because I think a lot of times students don't realize, like, you can jot these things down and, you know, bring a piece of paper with all your things written down, bring that to the meeting or put it on your phone so you've got it. What it shows the person on the other side of the desk is that, like, you're prepared and you're engaged and you're ready to have that conversation. Because I think a lot of times students think, like, oh, I don't want to be looking at a paper, or I don't want to, like, but what it tells me is that, like, you thought about it in advance, you were ready for that meeting, and, like, you want to be there and you want to make it work. So I know for myself, it's usually helpful. Like, if I'm going to an appointment or to a doctor and I want to make sure that I'm asking the right questions, I write those questions down in advance. So, like, that's like a good kind of tip just for life for you guys to think about some of these things in advance. If you have questions, like, write them all down, bring them in, and use that time to get the information that you want, you know? And it also might help too to think about, like, what accommodations you're seeking and just jot those things down, so that you've got it all there.
So I don't know how much you know about this, but so let's say you're going to work and you have a job and you need accommodations for that job. How would that process work?
Yeah, and I know a lot about this because I have lived many lives in the disability field, and one of those, I was also working for Job Corps doing disability support, making sure that Job Corps centers were compliant. And so the accommodations process in a workplace is really similar to higher education, so to college. So typically, and it depends on, like, where you're going for a job, right? If it's at, like, a company, or if it's with the federal government, or if it's at a grocery store, the process is a little different at each place. But you would go to the manager and ask what the process is for requesting an accommodation. And there's different laws around what companies or businesses have to provide to their workers. So you might want to touch base with some of the folks at Independence Now, just to see, you know, if you're looking at a place to work, just to see, like, kind of what that process is. But it's really similar. So you would provide documentation to the HR person, to the human resources person. Then you'd have a conversation about the types of accommodations that you would need. I think one big difference here is that usually human resources people at companies or at a business, like, don't really have a background in disability. So they might not know or be super comfortable with the conversation. But in that situation, like, the more prepared you are with what you need and what your documentation says, the better off you'll probably be, because you can say, oh, I need this. A great resource for this is the Job Accommodation Network, JAN. They have a website, and you can essentially look at, and it's good for businesses too, and for people. For the business, from the business perspective, the businesses can look at that website and say, okay, I have an employee who's deaf, or who's you know, got whatever condition, and what types of accommodations are reasonable, and it'll tell them. And for you, for the individual, it can tell you what types of accommodations you might want to request in that job setting. So that's the Job Accommodation Network, and you can just Google Job Accommodation Network, and that'll come up for you. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank
Someone
you.
asked a chat question. I have not been. Oh, yay. Ask Jan. Thanks. Shannon put it in the chat box, the askjan.org. Ask Jan. Someone else asked a question too. Oh, okay. So for students with Down syndrome, there's a really fantastic resource called Think College. And it's I think it's thinkcollege.net. So if you go to their website, if you have an intellectual disability like Down syndrome, or if you have if you're on the autism spectrum, there are a lot of opportunities out there now for different college programs, and Think College keeps a comprehensive list of all of those resources. So that's where I would direct you to kind of check out. But you'll still need those self-advocacy skills and just that familiarity too. Yeah, well, Shannon is on point with putting all these things in the chat box. Thanks, Shannon. So that could be really helpful too. Think College is a really fantastic resource. And I know that there's a couple places around here that actually have different college programs. George Mason University has a program in Virginia, and then there's Project Search. So you can kind of, if you go to the Think College website, you can look around and see some of those things. Are there other things? I totally missed a lot in this group chat, so I'm going back now to just see what's up.
I didn't see many more questions in there.
Okay, I was just I hadn't been
I was watching it.
I hadn't been paying attention at all, and then it popped up, and I was like,
Okay,
ooh.
don't worry.
So there's no more questions. I guess we're gonna wrap it up.
It might be privately sending you questions too, Annie.
Sounds good.
So you want to make sure.
Okay. Yeah. And then what I'm going to do for is send you, Shannon, just the slides that I used and some other resources that I think might be helpful for people as they're moving along.
Thank you.
Totally. Thanks, guys.
Sam, you want to wrap it up?
All right, cool.
Thank you.
All right, so that was Miss Annie's Tulkin from what's that? Accessible College, right?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, she was giving us all information about IEPs and things we need to know going into college, and so that was pretty cool. Thanks, and we were happy to have you.